I never thought I'd be the type of person to call off an engagement. 3 years together, a year of planning our wedding, and suddenly it was all gone, shattered in a single conversation that I was never meant to hear. My fiancé, James, came from what I'd call old money. The kind of family with a summer home in the Hamptons and Christmas vacations in Aspen. I came from decidedly middle-class roots, worked my way through college, built my career from scratch. But when we met at a mutual friend's dinner party, the connection was immediate. He wasn't like his family, or so I thought. The first time I met his parents, Margaret and Richard, at their sprawling colonial home in Connecticut, I felt the subtle scrutiny. The way Margaret's eyes lingered on my modest watch. The way Richard asked about my family background with that practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. "So, Eliza, what exactly do you do again?" Margaret asked over dinner, swirling her wine glass delicately. "I'm in financial analytics," I replied. "I work for Brunswick Capital." Richard perked up. "Brunswick? Not bad. And what level are you at there?" My fork paused midway to my mouth. "I'm a senior analyst." "Senior analyst," he repeated, exchanging a glance with Margaret. "And is there growth potential in that role?" James jumped in. "Dad, Eliza just got promoted last quarter. She's on track for management." I squeezed his hand under the table, grateful. But that was just the beginning. With each visit, the questions became more pointed, more invasive. How much did senior analysts at Brunswick typically make? Did I have student loans? What was my credit score like? Was my apartment rented or owned? I brushed it off as old money paranoia. Rich people often worry about gold diggers, right? I assured myself that once they got to know me, they'd see I loved James for who he was, not his family's money. Then came the casual Sunday brunch 6 months into our engagement. "We've been thinking," Margaret said between delicate bites of her eggs Benedict, "with the wedding coming up, maybe we should discuss finances." My stomach tightened. "What about them?" Richard cleared his throat. "Well, we think it might be prudent if you shared your financial records with us. Bank statements, investment accounts, credit history." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. "I'm sorry." "It's perfectly standard," Margaret added with a dismissive wave. "All marriages involve financial merging. We just want to ensure everything's compatible." I looked at James, waiting for him to step in, to tell his parents this was crossing a line. Instead, he stared intently at his plate, a muscle in his jaw twitching. "I don't think that's necessary," I said carefully. "James and I have discussed our finances, and we're comfortable with where we both stand." Richard's smile tightened. "Perhaps you misunderstand. The Harrington name carries certain expectations. We need to ensure those expectations are met." My cheeks burned. I'm marrying James, not the Harrington name. The tension at that table was thick enough to cut with a knife. James finally spoke up, but not in the way I'd hoped. "Maybe we could talk about this later, in private?" I agreed, if only to end the excruciating brunch. On the drive back to our apartment, the silence between us was deafening. "Were you going to say anything?" I finally asked. James sighed. "They're just old-fashioned, Eliza. They want to make sure everything's in order." "In order?" They were treating me like I was applying for a loan, not joining their family. "They've always been like this. It's how they were raised." His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Maybe we could just show them the basics, get them off our backs?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Absolutely not. My finances are private, and quite frankly, none of their business. He didn't argue further, but something had changed between us. A tiny fissure had formed in what I thought was unbreakable. The next few weeks were strained. James spent more time at his parents' house, coming home late with excuses about wedding planning. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office, partly to escape the tension that hung in our apartment like a storm cloud. That's when I received the email. An invitation to a family discussion about pre-wedding arrangements at the Harrington estate. Just the 4 of us. My hand shook as I read it. The formal tone, the implied command rather than request. I called James immediately. "Did you know about this?" A pause. "Yes. I think we should go, clear the air." "James, I'm not sharing my financial records with your parents. That's non-negotiable." Another pause, longer this time. Maybe it wouldn't be the worst thing, just to make them feel better about everything. That knot in my stomach tightened. Make them feel better about what, exactly? About me not being wealthy enough for their precious son? That's not fair, Eliza. Isn't it? Because it feels pretty damn fair from where I'm standing. We went back and forth, eventually agreeing to attend but with boundaries clearly established. I wouldn't be bringing bank statements or credit reports. Period. The day of the family discussion arrived. I wore my most professional outfit, navy blue blazer, tailored pants, minimal jewelry. Armor for what I knew would be a battle. The Harrington house felt colder than usual. Margaret led us to Richard's study, all dark wood and leather-bound books, family photos where everyone wore white and smiled too perfectly. Please, sit, Richard gestured to two chairs opposite his massive mahogany desk. I felt like I was being called to the principal's office. Margaret perched on the arm of Richard's chair as he steepled his fingers. Let's cut to the chase. We have concerns. My back stiffened. About the disparity between your backgrounds. About what that means for James's future. For any potential children. James shifted uncomfortably beside me but remained silent. My disappointment in him grew with each passing second. I'm not sure I understand, I said, though I understood perfectly. Richard sighed dramatically. Eliza, the Harrington family has maintained a certain standard of living for generations. Marriage isn't just about love, it's about building a future together. A future that aligns with family expectations. And you don't think I fit those expectations? We think, Margaret interjected smoothly, that transparency would help us all get on the same page. Your reluctance to share basic financial information raises concerns. My nails dug into my palms. My reluctance is because my financial situation is between me and James, not his parents. Richard leaned forward. James will inherit significant assets. The family trust has conditions. Prenuptial agreements will need to be discussed. These are realities. I turned to James, searching his face for any sign he was as appalled as I was. His eyes met mine briefly before dropping to the floor. Do you agree with this? I asked him directly. I think. He started, then cleared his throat. I think my parents have valid concerns about our future. Something inside me cracked. This man I thought I knew, who I thought loved me for who I was sitting silently while his parents essentially deemed me financially unworthy. I need some air, I said, standing abruptly. Excuse me. I walked out, half expecting James to follow. He didn't. The Harringtons' garden was immaculately landscaped, not a flower out of place. I paced along the stone pathway, trying to calm the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. After about 10 minutes, I decided to go back inside and end this farce of a meeting. As I approached the study, I heard voices through the partially open door. I paused, not intending to eavesdrop, but then I heard my name. Can't believe Eliza is being so difficult about this, Margaret was saying. It's a simple request. We need to know what we're dealing with, Richard added. James, be reasonable. The family trust has stipulations. We can't have someone with debt or financial problems accessing Harrington money. I know, Dad. James's voice made my blood run cold. But I've been working on her. I think she'll come around. Working on her? Margaret scoffed. You've been engaged for 6 months. This should have been settled before you even proposed. The prenup will protect you, Richard said, but we need to know what we're up against. Does she have student loans? Credit card debt? What's her credit score? These things affect you now. She's not like that, James sighed. She's good with money, just private about it. Too private, Margaret sniffed. It makes me wonder what she's hiding. Nothing, Mom. She's just independent. Independent is fine for a girlfriend, James. A wife needs to understand her place in this family. My ears were ringing. My place? Like some kind of acquisition? Look, James's voice dropped lower, forcing me to strain to hear. I've looked at her pay stubs. She makes about $85K. It's not much, but it's something. And she has savings, I'm sure. My heart stopped. He'd gone through my personal documents? The violation hit me like a physical blow. That's barely enough to cover her wardrobe if she's going to be a Harrington, Margaret sneered. The point is, Richard's authoritative voice cut in, we need a complete picture before this wedding goes any further. The family attorneys are drawing up a prenuptial agreement that will protect the trust in your inheritance. But they need her financial disclosure to complete it. I'll get it, James promised. I've been thinking about approaching it differently. Maybe position it as estate planning? Make her think it's about our future children? Richard chuckled. Now you're thinking like a Harrington. Whatever works. Just get it done. I stood frozen outside that door, my entire world collapsing around me. The man I loved, the man I thought loved me, was conspiring with his parents to trick me into financial disclosure for their prenup. He'd already violated my privacy by going through my pay stubs. And worse, he was letting his parents dictate the terms of our marriage, treating me like I was some gold-digging threat rather than his partner. My hands were shaking so badly I had to press them against the wall to steady myself. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in this house. I walked back to the garden, drew several deep breaths, and then marched back to the study, pushing the door open with more force than necessary. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me, startled. Eliza, James stood quickly. Are you okay? You look pale. I stared at him, this stranger wearing my fiancé's face. I'm leaving. Don't follow me. What? He stepped toward me. What's wrong? I laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the book-lined room. What's wrong? Maybe you should ask your parents. Or maybe you should check my pay stubs again for the answer. The color drained from his face. You heard. Every word. I pulled off my engagement ring, the 3-carat diamond that suddenly felt like a shackle, and placed it on Richard's desk with a soft click that somehow echoed like thunder. I believe this belongs to the Harrington Family Trust. Margaret gasped. Now, Eliza, let's not be hasty. Hasty? I turned to her, my voice deadly calm despite the hurricane raging inside me. I've spent 3 years with your son. I've loved him, supported him, believed in him. And all this time, apparently, I was just a financial liability to be managed. Richard stood, his authoritative presence filling the room. You're overreacting. These are standard considerations for families like ours. Families like yours, I repeated. You know what? You're right. I don't belong in a family like yours. A family that values bank accounts over character. That measures worth in dollars rather than decency. James reached for me. Eliza, please. We can talk about this. I stepped back, out of his reach. There's nothing to talk about. You violated my privacy. You conspired with your parents behind my back. You were planning to trick me into signing a prenup. It's not like that, he protested, but his eyes told me everything. It was exactly like that. I make $85,000 a year, I said, my voice rising. I have $42,000 in savings. I have a 401 with $36,000. I have no debt except for a car payment. My credit score is 793. There. Full disclosure. Are those numbers acceptable to the mighty Harrington legacy, or should I see myself out? The stunned silence was answer enough. That's what I thought. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. You know what's ironic? I would have signed a reasonable prenup if you'd just asked me honestly. That's what partners do, they talk about tough things transparently. But that's not what we were, was it? Partners. I walked out of that house with my head held high, even as my heart was shattering into a million pieces. I made it all the way to my car before the tears came, hot and fast, blurring the driveway as I drove away from what I thought was my future. James called incessantly for the next 3 days. I ignored every call, every text, every email. On the 4th day, I took a personal day from work and went to our apartment while I knew he'd be at the office. I packed my essentials, left my key on the counter, and wrote a simple note, forward my mail to my parents' address. I'll arrange to get the rest of my things later. It wasn't until I was sitting in my childhood bedroom that night, surrounded by the remnants of my previous life, that the full weight of what had happened crashed down on me. I sobbed until I had no tears left, mourning not just the relationship I'd lost, but the one I thought I had. My phone buzzed with yet another text from James. Please, just talk to me. My parents were wrong. I was wrong. I love you. I stared at those 3 words that once meant everything to me. Now they rang hollow, tainted by the memory of his voice saying, I've been working on her. Instead of responding to him, I opened my laptop and began searching for apartments in the city. It was time to rebuild my life, on my terms, by my values, with my hard-earned money that might not have been enough for the Harringtons, but was plenty for me to stand on my own 2 feet. 2 weeks later, I received a letter. Thick cream stationery, Harrington monogram embossed in gold at the top. Margaret's handwriting. My first instinct was to tear it up, but curiosity won out. Dear Eliza, it began. I hope this letter finds you well, considering the circumstances. I'm writing to express our sincere regret for how events unfolded. While our concerns were genuine, our approach was deeply flawed and hurtful. We failed to see you as the remarkable woman you are, focusing instead on outdated notions of what makes a suitable match for our son. James is devastated. Richard and I have had many difficult conversations with him, and ourselves, about our behavior. We recognize now that we were wrong to prioritize financial considerations over your character, your intelligence, and your obvious love for our son. If you're willing, we would like the opportunity to apologize in person. No discussions of money, prenups, or conditions. Simply a chance to ask for your forgiveness and perhaps begin to repair what our short-sightedness has broken. Regardless of your decision, please know that we genuinely wish you well. It was signed simply, Margaret Harrington. I read it 3 times, searching for the manipulation, the hidden agenda. I couldn't find one, which didn't mean it wasn't there. That night, my phone rang with James's number. After weeks of ignoring his calls, something made me answer. Hello, James. His sharp intake of breath told me he hadn't expected me to pick up. Eliza. Thank you for answering. What do you want? To apologize. Properly. Not over the phone, but in person. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to agree immediately. I don't think that's a good idea. Please, his voice cracked. One conversation. In public, wherever you'd feel comfortable. I need to look you in the eyes when I tell you how sorry I am. How much I regret what happened. How much I miss you. Part of me, the part that had loved this man for 3 years, wanted to rush to him, to believe that people can change, that mistakes can be forgiven. But the other part, the part that had heard him conspiring with his parents, kept me grounded in reality. I'll think about it, I said finally. That's all I can promise right now. That's more than I deserve. Thank you. After we hung up, I sat on my bed, turning my phone over and over in my hands. Was I being too harsh? Too unforgiving? Or was I protecting myself from people who had shown me exactly who they were? I decided to meet him. Not for reconciliation, but for closure. At a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups. He stood when he saw me, his face a mixture of hope and terror. I got you a vanilla latte, he said. Still your favorite? I nodded, taking the cup but not drinking from it. Thanks. We sat in awkward silence for a moment. James looked different, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. Good, a vindictive part of me thought. Let him suffer a fraction of what I had. I rehearsed what to say 100 times, he finally began. Nothing seemed adequate. So I'll just speak from the heart. I betrayed you. I betrayed your trust, your love, everything we built together. There's no excuse. Your parents. No, he interrupted firmly. This isn't about them. Yes, they had their concerns, their expectations. But I'm a grown man. I made my choices. I chose to go behind your back instead of standing up for you, for us. That's on me, not them. I studied his face, searching for signs of the manipulation I'd overheard in his father's study. All I saw was raw pain and regret. You looked at my pay stubs. He flinched. I did. It was wrong. Invasive. Unforgivable. I got caught up in trying to placate my parents instead of being honest with you. I told myself I was protecting our relationship, but really, I was being a coward. I took a sip of my latte, buying time. And the prenup? The plan to trick me into signing it? His face flushed with shame. Another terrible mistake. We should have discussed it openly, as equals. I knew you weren't after my family's money. I knew that from the moment we met. You've never cared about that stuff. Then why? I set down my cup. Why do all of this? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. Because I was weak. Because I've spent my entire life trying to live up to the Harrington name, trying to be the son my father wanted. When you refused to share your finances with them, I panicked. I was afraid of disappointing them, of rocking the boat. So you disappointed me instead. Yes. His voice broke. The worst decision of my life. We talked for over 2 hours. About trust, about family dynamics, about the values we thought we shared. He told me he'd moved out of his parents' guest house, rented his own apartment, was seeing a therapist to work through his unhealthy need for his parents' approval. Part of me wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe people could change, that relationships could heal from even the deepest wounds. The other part remembered too clearly the sound of his voice as he plotted with his parents. I need more time, I said finally. This isn't something I can decide over coffee. He nodded, disappointment clear in his eyes but also understanding. I'll wait. However long it takes. And if you decide you can't forgive me, I'll respect that too. As I stood to leave, he reached across the table, not quite touching me. Eliza? For what it's worth, I've learned that some things are more valuable than money. Honor. Integrity. The love of someone who sees you for who you really are. I'm just sorry I had to lose you to learn that lesson. I walked away with tears in my eyes but my head held high. I didn't know if James and I would find our way back to each other. I didn't know if I could ever fully trust him again. But I did know this, I would never again compromise my self-worth for anyone. I would never again stay silent when I should speak up. 6 months later, I received a job offer from a competing firm, a substantial promotion with a 6-figure salary. As I updated my resume, I smiled at the irony. Now I made enough to satisfy even the Harringtons' lofty standards. But by then, it didn't matter what they thought. The only approval I needed was my own. James and I did eventually talk again. Many times, in fact. Slowly rebuilding, not the relationship we had, but something new. Something based on honesty, respect, and equality. Whether it leads us back to love or simply to friendship remains to be seen. But one thing's for certain, I'll never again allow someone else to determine my value based on the numbers in my bank account. Because while the Harringtons were busy counting dollars, they failed to realize what they were losing, something that no trust fund could ever buy. Thanks for listening. These stories take hours to make. Please like, comment, and subscribe.